felt that I was in a position where I could help give Joan a shot at doing what she wanted to do, and that it would either work or it wouldn't work, but that I'd had a chance to succeed or fail, and that there was no reason why she shouldn't have a chance to succeed or fail. The budget came in, I think, at around $350,000. I thought I could raise that money. I remember going to a lot of the people who had invested in my real estate projects and saying to them, if you put $5,000 in and $10,000 in, you may lose all of it, but maybe you won't lose all of it. The difficulty was simply that you had to find the least expensive way of doing everything that you wanted to do, and at the same time provide the director with the things that were necessary, and the cinematographer and the costume person, where they could create the ambience and the mood that they needed in order to make the story credible. A lot of times between a producer and a director, there's a certain amount of tension. The producer's worried about the money, the director's worried about the vision, you know. But in this case, I understood what Joan wanted to do, and I think that the film was done with a lot of Yiddish, with all black and white cinematography, were a couple of things that made that film very unique. And those decisions, which were basically Joan's decisions, but which all of us around her supported, were critical ones in making the film work. We fully intended to make the film non-union. That was how it was budgeted. And I kept trying to figure out ways to avoid it. I was sitting in my office one day and the phone rang. And the guy said, I'm so-and-so from the Teamsters, I'd like to talk to you. And I said, well, what do you want to talk to me about? He said, we want to talk to you about the film you're making. You're making a non-union film. And I said, that's right. And he said, what are you doing that for? And I said, because what's all the money we have? We don't have money to make a union movie. He said, well, I think you ought to talk to me about it. So he said, I'm going to be driving by your office building in a half hour. I'll be in a blue Cadillac, and you be there, and we'll go around the block a couple times and talk about it. So I got in the car with him. We drove around the block a couple of times, and he said to me at one point, we chatted, very friendly, very nice guy. He said, there's a copy of the Daily News on the floor. Why don't you give it to me? So I picked up the copy of the Daily News and handed it to him, and there was a pistol on the floor in the Daily News. And he said to me, you ought to give a lot of thought to whether you want to make a non-union movie or not. And I said, I've already decided that we're going to make a union movie. So he said, it won't be so tough. He said, we'll work it out. And we did. I mean, they were quite reasonable. They didn't put any kind of a burden on us that we couldn't handle. Teamsters are great guys. Once they're on your side, you don't want to have them not on your side. And they were very helpful with the movie and helped us kind of move it along, get it done. But it added $20,000 to the cost of the film, which we had to go out and raise. And that was the unionization of Hester Street. When we finished this film, the first thing I thought to do, looking for a distributor, because I knew that was what had to happen, was I took it to the major studios, all of whom watched it, and all of whom said very nice things about it, and all of whom said no thank you. Then we began to show it to smaller distributors. And we began to enter it in film festivals. And that still exists today as the pattern. There then might have been a half a dozen good film festivals in the country. Now there may be 500 good film festivals in the country. The smaller distributors all saw it as kind of an ethnic oddity. It was Jewish, it had Yiddish in it. There were large Jewish populations in New York and Miami and Chicago and Los Angeles. They began to talk about, well, maybe the film might work in those cities. And I wasn't prepared, and Joan wasn't prepared to make that kind of a distribution decision, although we really didn't have any option. I mean, we weren't getting offers. We were getting a lot of conversation, comments about the film. My recollection is that the film was accepted at the Dallas Film Festival, which was, at that point anyway, an important film festival. We didn't submit it to the New York Film Festival, but we had submitted it to the Cannes Film Festival. We hadn't heard yet. It got into Dallas, and it was very well received in Dallas, and it got some nice reviews in the local press. And it got written up, I think, in Variety, in a nice kind of way. And then the film was accepted at the Critics' Week in Cannes. And that was a big deal because it gave us an opportunity to have the film shown to a large audience, to a non-American audience primarily, to get critical reviews from a large number of sources. And in the case of the film, which was very well received there, we were able to make some sales to France and to England and to Germany and I think to Italy, which provided us with the money to think about launching the film if we couldn't find a distributor. It seemed to us that the film was touching something. And it was really at Cannes that we began to think about the film as having the possibility of being a broad, successful film to a general audience. I met, when I came back, with one distributor who was very, very interested in acquiring the film. He was the best independent distributor in the United States. It was called Cinema 5. It's a company run by a man named Donald Rugoff. He had seen the film in New York, and then he'd seen it again at Cannes, so he'd seen it with different audiences. And he came to me and he said, I want to acquire your film for distribution. I couldn't get him to talk to me about how he was going to distribute the film. So I said to him at dinner, Donald, if we give you the film, I want to have the opportunity to sit in the meetings that you have just to listen. I said, I've been working with this film for almost a year. I know some things about it, and I'd like to have an opportunity to sit in and listen while you're making marketing decisions. And he said to me, how much did I offer you for the film? And I said, $370,000. He said, I'll give you another $1,000. And I said, what do I do with $1,000? He said, buy yourself a ticket to any place in the world, but you'll never sit in on a marketing meeting in my office if we acquire the film. So I went home and talked to Jonah about it, and I said, I don't want him to distribute the film because he's liable to do with this film what other people have talked to us about doing, which is to try to get his money back by selling it as an ethnic film. So Joan said, well, but what does that mean? What are we going to do with it? I had seen a film called Woman Under the Influence that John Cassavetes had directed and had self-distributed. I didn't know him at all, except by reputation. And I picked up the phone and I called him and talked to him in California, and I told him what was happening, told him the whole background of this film. And I said, what do you think we should do with the film? Should I go with a guy like Rugoff? He said, distribute it yourself. And I said, I don't know the first thing about distribution. I hardly know anything about producing at this point. He said, I have two people out here that have worked under Women Under the Influence, and I'll put them on a plane to New York if you want them, and they'll go to work for you. And I said, okay. And he did. And we set up a plan to distribute the film ourselves. One of the people that he sent me was a wonderful man named Jeff Lipsky, who was his booker, who booked all the theaters for John Cassavetes. And another guy was a guy named Doug Dilge. And then there was a third person who showed up, whose name was Blaine Novak. And the three of them and I began to figure out how to distribute the film. They all loved the film. They were young. They were in their 20s. They were very enthusiastic. They had just had this great success with Cassavetes on his film. And we developed a marketing campaign for the film, which presented the film as a romantic comedy, a story for everybody. It opened primarily in art houses, of which there were about 100. By that time, the word on the film was very good. It had gotten a good review in the New York Times. It had gotten a good review in the Los Angeles Times. It had good word of mouth from Cannes. There was a buzz about the film, and the art film theaters were all willing to handle it. We wanted to try to get the film out into the broader markets, and we spent weeks and weeks and weeks pursuing the general cinema and the people who had hundreds and hundreds of theaters, none of whom expressed an interest. But after we had played at the Plaza in New York and at the Music Hall in Los Angeles, I think for 27 weeks, we finally broke through general cinema, and they gave us 90 theaters in cities where the film ordinarily would not have played. And then other chains like United Artists chains and others came along. So we distributed it effectively in a way that I don't think would be possible today. We had a lot of trouble collecting the money that was due us because they would never pay us because we just had one movie and we didn't have a follow-up movie. And some places had been playing the movie for weeks and accumulating a large amount of money. But we would go out on Friday, 3 or 4 of us, different parts of the country, and we'd show up at the theaters, and we'd say, we're taking our print back. And they'd say, well, you can't do it. It's Friday. We do all our business on Friday and Saturday and Sunday. And we'd say, well, but you aren't paying us any money, so you can't have the film. And then they would say, well, we'll write you a check. So that's the way, those problems still exist today for an independent filmmaker. And the thing that really kicked the film into high gear was that Carol received an Academy Award nomination as Best Actress. And in those days, when Academy Award nominations were made, every newspaper in the United States carried the pictures of the Best Actor and Best Actress nominees somewhere on their pages, sometimes on the front page. So suddenly every city in the United States saw that an actress in Hester Street had been nominated for Best Actress. And we ended up with about 1,600 theaters that showed Hester Street, which was just a remarkable amount of penetration. I think at that time there probably were only 11 or 12,000 theaters in the United States. So it started out as an art film, and then it got a little broader distribution, and then when Carol got the nomination. There's an interesting story about Carol's nomination. At least I think it's interesting. I got a call one day from a guy in California who said, "My name is Max Burkett. You don't know me, but I want to talk to you about Hester Street." And I said, "Fine." He said, "Do you know who I am?" I said, "I don't know who you are." He said, "I used to be the publicist for David Selznick, and I've seen your movie, and I love it." And I said, "Great." He said, "I want to get you an Academy Award nomination, maybe more than one Academy Award nomination for this film, and I know how to do it." And he said, "I want to come in New York and tell you about it." And he said, "I'll pay my own way into New York, but if you like what I've got to talk to you about," he said, "you're going to have to pay me a fee to do the work for you to try to get an Academy Award nomination." So I said, "Come on in." He came into New York. He was this diminutive guy, about 5'2". By that time, I had checked it out, and he had, in fact, been David O. Selznick's publicity agent. He had been the publicist on Gone with the Wind and other films. And this dynamo guy walked into my office, and he said, "Your film can get an Academy Award nomination." He said, "I think you can get one for Carol Kane. I think you can get one for your wife. I think you can get one for the movie." And I said, "We would be really happy with just one." He said, "You pick it, and I'll go to work and get it for you." And Joan and I decided that we would try to get one for Carol because we thought her performance was just spectacular. And he took the film cans back to California with him. Those days there were no videotapes and no DVDs. And I said to him, "What are you going to do?" He said, "I got a lot of friends out there. Frank Sinatra's my friend. Bob Hope is my friend. They all have screening rooms. I'm going to take it around to the screening rooms. They're going to show it to their friends." He said, "I'm going to take it to the houses where all the retired people who used to work in the theater are who vote in the Academy. I'm going to screen it for them." He said, "By the time you're through, everybody that needs to see this film will have seen it, in addition to those who've seen it in the theater." And when the nominations came out, Carol got a nomination. And it was just, and he really did it. He really did it. He'd call up and he'd say, "Frank Sinatra saw it last night. He loved it. And, so-and-so saw it." He was, I think he must have been 80 years old. It just took it on as a sort of challenge, something he wanted to do. But it really made that film. I mean, it created a tremendous amount of interest in that film. The thing that I like about producing is I love to try to sort of manage the pandemonium and try to keep it calm. But it was the exciting experience of the movie, besides making it, was distributing it. It was a real challenge to take this movie out into the marketplace and present it as a film, just a film, not an ethnic film. And then when we took the movie around the world and ended up selling it in almost every country in the world, we discovered that every country is a country of immigrants. It's part of the matrix of life for virtually everybody in every country in the world. The really satisfying thing about the film was that we were able to move it around and get it seen by people every place.